Welcome to the Climb! This is a show dedicated to helping singers, songwriters, and indie artists like you create leverage in the music business. Leverage is what you're going to need in today's music industry to get ahead. You're going to have to show some business. You're going to have to show that you know what you're doing, how to write songs. You know how to work the levers here behind the curtain. If you're going to take the next step, you're not going to be discovered out of thin air and then turned into a star. And that's why we called it The Climb, C.L.I.M.B, creating leverage in the music business. There's a lot to it, and that's a Baxtronym. And that comes from my good friend and co-host, Mr. Brent Baxter, who's an award-winning hit songwriter with cuts by Alan Jackson, Randy Travis, Lady A, Joe Nichols, and more. And what I love about Brent is he helps songwriters like you by revealing how to write like a pro, do business like a pro, and then on a regular basis, he gives you opportunities to connect and create relationships with the pros so that you can climb that ladder and exploit yourself, so to speak, right? You can find Brent very easily at songwritingpro.com. Once again, that's songwritingpro.com.
And I would like to introduce you to my co-host, Johnny Dwinell. Johnny owns Daredevil Production. They're breaking artists digitally by identifying new fans through data. It's complicated, but Johnny's smart. If you're an artist looking to increase your streams, blow up your video views, sell more live show tickets, and get discovered by new fans, TV, and music industry pros, then Daredevil Production can help. Daredevil has worked with multi-platinum artists like Colin Ray, Tracy Lawrence, Ty Herndon, and Andy Griggs, just to name a few. You can find Johnny at daredevilproduction.com. That is production, singular, no S, and there's no S because there is no other Johnny D.
How you doing, brother?
Man, I'm good. I was just telling you off air, I just got my new Mr. Coffee mug heater for my office, a little Christmas gift to myself. My office can get a little chilly. It's an old, almost 100-year-old house, and this was a little add-on, so it's not on really the rest of the central heat and air like the rest of the house. So I'm like, ooh, keep my coffee hot. So that's my big win for the day, Johnny.
That's awesome. And I was telling you off air, like, I don't understand why you would need that. You drink your coffee too slow. Like,
I do drink it. The second cup gets slow. The first one usually pretty good. The second one gets, I slow down.
I drink my coffee like I drink my whiskey. Fast and furious.
I'm more of a drip, just a constant drip throughout the day. There you go. That's how I do it, just steady.
Hey, Ben, if I could get around town and do that, like have just an IV, a drip of whiskey, I'd probably do that. Like, that would keep everything on an even keel.
Or keel. All right,
well, today, the title of today's episode is Jimmy Iovine Agrees. This is the best time to be an artist. And
what does he know?
There's a great interview with him that was done in the New York Times, and we're going to unpack that interview a little bit and just kind of talk about what happens with that. But before we do that, let's take care of a little business. As always, we are super stoked, excited, proud as peacocks to be a part of American Songwriters Podcast Network. I mean, that's a 36-year-old brand, and everybody that you and I and Brent want to be has been on the cover.
That's right.
Of that magazine.
The last 3 issues at the time of this recording, John Bon Jovi is on this month's. I had an interview with him. Then the month before is Garth Brooks. The month before that is Phineas, producer and writer of Billie Eilish, her brother, all that stuff. So,
come on.
I mean, that's a good little range right there. Just those 3.
It's all about the songwriter. I love it. And join the Climb community if you haven't done so. This is a great Facebook community. We run a pretty tight ship, but it's all about peace, love, and grooviness, and indie artists, songwriters, indie musicians, singers. This is a great place for you to hook up, get co-writes, learn more about the business, ask marketing questions, business questions. You're going to get a lot of answers from a lot of pros. There's pros in there. There's amateurs in there. There's aspiring pros in there. And we want you to be a part of it. So you have to ask to be let in. But we let everybody in. Just be good boys and girls. Subscribe to the podcast wherever you consume your podcast. So that way you get all of the episodes and you can consume them at will. My podcast episodes, I'm typically not up to date on. I'll binge them, so I like to make sure they're where I can get to them when it's time to binge them. And then tell a friend about it if you haven't done so already. That's the best tribute you can give to Brent and I. Make sure that, hey, well, why do these guys get to own 40 minutes of your time on a weekly basis? Well, here's why, and let them know, because maybe we can help them too. And leave a rating and review. We're trying to get to 200 before the end of the year. So please take 30 seconds and do that.
Yeah, we'd appreciate it. And also just want to share some new heights for the week. So every week in the Climb community, we have a post on Wednesday, says New Heights, and you are welcome. We want you to leave a comment bragging on yourself, celebrating so we can celebrate with you. big or small, we love them all the wins. So I just want to share this one. It's from Sunday Joe Graham, Climber. She says, got a video recorded and ready to go for Tootie May's new single, Holly Dolly Christmas. So Sunday is a songwriter, but she has an alter ego, which is Tootie May, who does country parodies of songs. She'll rewrite like One Margarita, that Luke Bryan song, to One Block Velveeta. And that kind of stuff. So it's fun anyway. So she has a new single coming out called Holly Dolly Christmas. So she's excited to get the video recorded and ready to go for that. And so people are just sharing their wins in there. So we hope you'll come on in and join the celebration.
Good for her. All right. Well, let's get down to this. Let's dig into this one here. This might end up being one of my quicker ones, if you can believe that. I'm going to say that up front because that'll be long, because it'll just drag out. But for those of you who are not familiar with Jimmy Iovine, let's just give a brief history on him. This is a music mogul. This is one of the greats in the music industry who thinks at a very high level out of both sides of his brain, right? Mm-hmm. Artistically as well as business-wise. He's a great salesman hustler. And just to give you a little bit of the resume here, he started as a recording engineer in the 70s, and he worked with John Lennon. He worked with Bruce Springsteen. And I mean, his first record with Bruce Springsteen was the Born to Run album. He engineered that. He also engineered Meatloaf's Bat Out of Hell albums, both of those. Patti Smith's album Easter, which included her top 1040 hit Because the Night, which is, by the way, written by none other than Bruce Springsteen. I wonder how that happened.
I wonder. Yeah.
Interesting relationships.
Connect the dots.
Yep. And he co-produced with Tom Petty. He co-produced Damn the Torpedoes. That was Tom Petty's breakthrough record. Didn't know this. U2's Rattle and Hum. He produced that. Wow. Belladonna from Stevie Nicks. Making movies from Dire Straits, Get Close for the Pretenders. I mean, this dude is all over it. He did music supervision in a couple different feature films back in the 80s. Mm-hmm. And in 1990, he co-founded Interscope Records, which became Interscope Geffen A&M after a merger in 1999. So Iovine's the one who signed Tupac Shakur. And also he created, or at least he was the money behind Death Row Records, which was a huge label and a big moneymaker in the 90s. And he signed artists there like Eminem, which is, I mean, one of the best-selling rap artists ever, 50 Cent, and co-produced the 8 Mile record with Eminem. I mean, this guy's all over the place. Wow. Then... get this.
But there's more.
There's more. Like, this guy doesn't stop. Okay. So in 2008, he teams up with Dr. Dre and he co-founded Beats, the headphone company with Dr. Dre. It's a headphones brand. And by 2012, this headphone company had captured 20% of the market share. They did that out of pragmatism. They just, I think especially when you're talking about like from Dr. Dre's perspective and in the rap world, there's a lot of sub-lows that are happening, like sonically speaking. Mm-hmm. And man, those aren't going to come through in a pair of earbuds, And all the producers that I work with and stuff, when they send me a mix, but they're like, okay, don't listen to that on your earbuds. Get some real headphones. I'm like, okay. Like I will, like I got freaking studio monitors in my office. You know what I mean? Like, dude, I'm not going to do you wrong. Because they want you to hear the whole thing. But they sold Beats in May 28th of 2014 to Apple for $3 billion. Woo! And at the point that happened, by the way, he was hired by Apple in some sort of undisclosed, we don't know exactly what he was doing, but I think he was there for like 2 or 3 years making a salary with Apple. So he's firmly got one foot, obviously, in the music industry, but also in tech. And it's about the difference between the two. And I think of a lot of the music executives, he's certainly one of the most outspoken about how that should work.
He's the man.
He's the man. Yeah. So in December of last year, okay, and I've quoted from this before in our podcast, this article, but I want to unpack and dig into it because, first of all, it validates a lot of the stuff, Brent, that you and I have been saying on this podcast for years.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm glad he's been listening to the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, hey, Jimmy, no extra charge, right? Like, whenever Jimmy needs something, he comes to me, right? Okay, that's not true. We're kidding about that. Don't believe me. I've never met Jimmy Iovine. I have no idea who he is. But I'm going to read a little bit from this article, and then I just want to focus in on some points from this because this, to me, it's a mind blow. So it's a New York Times article. We'll put the link in the show notes. The author is Ben Cesario. I have no idea who he is, but I love this article. And the title is Jimmy Iovine Knows Music and Tech. Here's why he's worried.
Oh.
Which maybe goes against what the title of this podcast is. But
Yeah.
see, why he's worried from a record label executive position is why we should be excited. This is where the opportunity is. And he's retired now, okay? I'm not going to read it all to you, but I'm going to read definitely some parts of it. So the beginning is the record executive who made the leap to Silicon Valley looks back on a decade of the music business and sees a major problem on the horizon. The biggest story in music over the last decade was the industry's reconciliation with tech. After a decade of fighting the internet, the music business fully embraced it in the 2010s. Streaming has now finally returned the business, which was nearly decimated by the shift from physical to digital formats, to growth. Mm-hmm. Perhaps no one has a broader view of this phenomenon than Jimmy Iovine, the producer and record executive who made the leap to the other side. He and his partner, Dr. Dre, sold their company Beats Electronics to Apple for $3 billion in 2014 and helped launch Apple Music. That's the other thing that he did.
Oh, yeah, that.
The tech giant's late entry to the streaming market, and they now have more than 60 million subscribers, which is a big deal. Mm-hmm. It was from the start a strange pairing. Apple is aggressively cautious in maintaining its public image. Iovine is the son of a Brooklyn longshoreman, blurts profanities in a high-pitched rasp, and is one of music's great hustler salesmen. But Iovine, who co-founded the Interscope label in 1990 and led it until he left in 2014, has long been one of the sharpest observers of the tug-of-war between the entertainment industry and Silicon Valley. Iovine, who's 66, retired from Apple in 2018, says he's devoted himself to passion projects like the XQ Institute. And he even started taking guitar lessons, it says. He's realizing now how hard Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen jobs really were.
Now you figure it out.
So here's some excerpts from this conversation. Back in 2010, you were still at Interscope, where you had hits with Lady Gaga, Eminem, and the Black Eyed Peas. At the same time, you were building up Beats. But within 4 years, you left the label and sold Beats to Apple. Why did you take that trajectory? Jimmy says, what you're talking about actually goes back 20 years. It's all a response to Napster. I saw how powerful that technology was, and I realized we had to switch gears. The record companies are not going to exist without tech. And neither are you, people, right? We're out of the article now. Neither are you. You're not going to exist without tech. Think about how simple that statement is, but think about how profound it is.
Yeah.
Right? Like, if you haven't embraced the fact that you're going to need to understand tech, better figure that out fast.
That's right.
But this is your opportunity to get ahead of everything, you know? He said, why I got into the music business originally was to be associated with things that were cool. I realized that the record business at that moment, the way it was responding to Napster, was not cool. And then the interviewer was like, meaning suing people? Because if you remember back in the day, that was just seems to be everybody's answer to something new, right? And what do the taxi cabs do when Uber comes out? Instead of spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to get their own tech out and compete, they just try to get rid of them and sue them. Right. And that's what the record business did with Napster.
The thing is, don't compete, delete. Just get rid of the competition. Yeah. And we just go about doing what we normally do.
And it doesn't work that way. It's never going to work that way. There it is. If that makes all the sense in the world so much that you're hostile about it and willing to spend hundreds of millions of dollars to try to beat it, you're probably not going to get rid of it. You're really not. So Jimmy responds, yes, meaning suing people and putting up a moat like that was going to do something. So he said to himself, I'm at the wrong party. And I met a bunch of people in tech. I met Steve Jobs and Eddie Q from Apple. And I said, this is where the party is. We need to incorporate this thinking into Interscope, right? I find out a lot through the artists I work with. Dre is a perfectionist of audio, maybe one of the greatest audio producers that ever existed. And when I found out what Dre was concerned about, that the equipment his kids were listening to the music on, an entire generation was learning about audio through cheap, inefficient equipment, and that's how Beats got started. Steve Jobs used to sit with me at his Greek restaurant and draw out what I needed to do to make hardware. He'd say, here's distribution, here's manufacturing. He'd be drawing on this paper with a Sharpie, and I'd go, expletive, right? Like, crap. He's getting schooled, right? So what did you learn when you got to the other side? He said, I didn't want it to be the other side. I wanted it to be all one thing. I wasn't bailing on music. I always thought that technology was going to get people to listen to music in a better way, and you were going to promote it all through a streaming service. But it would all be the same house. And he said, is that where things ended up? Are music and tech in the same house, or is the house divided? He said, the two sides don't speak the same language. Content doesn't know what technology is building, and engineers are just going by the way they see a problem. The streaming business has a problem on the horizon, and so does the music business. That doesn't mean they can't figure it out. So what's the streaming business's problem on the horizon? So this is a big paragraph that I wanted to share with you guys. The answer is margin. It doesn't scale. At Netflix, the more subscribers you have, the less your costs are. That's, by the way, new Netflix, not old Netflix, because what does new Netflix have, Brent?
Oh, well, they're doing their original content.
They own the content.
They own the content. So once that content is paid for, it largely can scale. Whereas, where I think he's going with this, go ahead.
Go on. No, go.
Oh, is that the cost follow you with streaming. Every time you stream a song by Dolly Parton or whatever, there's a cost because you got to pay for that stream. You got to pay the content creators. You got to pay the rights holders on that, meaning the songwriters, the publishers, the artists, all that stuff. So the more streams you get, the higher your costs go versus, hey, like a movie theater, it's going to cost us this much money to run this movie in a theater. How many people can we pack in? Because that way,
and for how long
our
can
margins
we
go up. Right. Whereas streaming, just think about movie theater. Well, it costs us for every person that's in there. So our margin stays about the same or maybe even gets worse, So the cost follow you with streaming.
Exactly. And now back to sort of exacerbate the point here. If you factor in that Spotify and the streaming services are middlemen, right? They're distributors. And the only value that a distributor brings in any business deal in any industry is that they have some kind of a relationship with the end user that the creator of the product or service either can't have, which used to be the case in the music industry, and is the case now, doesn't have.
Yeah.
They don't have it.
And another problem they're dealing with is that their costs are going up because we're actually finally winning some legal battles and holding them accountable and actually expecting them to pay us a more fair rate. Like we're actually getting a seat at the table to decide what they pay us.
Yeah.
As content creators and rights holders. So actually their costs are going up because, oh my gosh, we got to actually start paying these people something.
And I think it's important to point out once again that the streaming services don't own any of the intellectual property. Hollywood and the music industry are very, very similar industries in that they're about the same age-ish, and they create artistic intellectual property. And for a century, they have been promoting that artistic intellectual property on broadcast platforms. But the vast difference between Hollywood and the music industry is the product. The product is different. It still costs millions of dollars to make a TV show or a movie.
Yeah.
And there's 40,000 uploads a day on Spotify. So Spotify can't do what Netflix did to play the game that Netflix is playing. They can't position themselves like that.
However, I'm curious. Question. Joe Rogan just signed a huge deal with Spotify, right? For the Joe Rogan podcast?
Yeah. $100 million.
Is that their version of like Netflix going, now we have these Netflix movies?
I think that's what they're doing.
Is that their version of owning some of the content? Because who's going to give them exclusive music, right? Because like music is be everywhere. But I wonder if the podcast is where Spotify is trying to create their exclusive.
This is exactly what's going on because, listen, Joe Rogan's like the big, most recent story, but I'm pretty sure they're about $1.5 or $2 billion into podcast purchases. And so what do the podcasts bring, by the way? Can we just go up to 30,000 feet and forget about the content? Okay. Why would they give Joe Rogan $100 million?
Because he gets a lot of earballs on his stuff.
He's got traffic.
He got traffic. Exactly.
He's got traffic. Hello. Yes. $100 million in traffic. Started doing it out of his living room with his buddies, right?
Yeah. He who has the traffic rules the road.
Exactly. Correct. So I think that's really interesting. And so, the costs follow you. So it's unsustainable. The current relationship that the DSPs, that's the digital service providers, that's Apple Music, that's Amazon, that's Spotify, the current relationship that they have in the music industry is wholly unsustainable. It won't last because it can't last because there's not enough money there. But now we're going to add insult to injury. Okay. So again, he says the problem is margin. It doesn't scale. At Netflix, the more subscribers you have, the less your costs are. In streaming music, the costs follow you. And the other problem is that the streaming music services are utilities. They're all the same. Okay. Look at what's working in video. Disney has nothing but original stuff. Netflix has tons of original stuff, but the music streaming services are all the same. And that's the problem. What happens when nothing is commoditized is that it becomes a war of price.
Yes,
and if you can get the exact same thing,
except for the consumer.
Yeah. And if you can get the exact same thing next door cheaper, somebody's going to enter this game and just lower the price.
Yeah.
Spotify's trying with podcasts, just to point you out, Brent. That's how smart you are. Later on this article, you're right with the same mind as I bind. And who knows? He said maybe that will all work. And, he talks about Daniel Ek here and just he thinks he's done an extraordinary job and the deal, he understands the deals that they got and they're impossible deals, but they're all suffering. It's just going to break. The bow is going to break and the baby will fall, right? So then the interviewer asked him this. If you look at the last 20 years of the music business as a recovery from Napster, has the problem now been solved? He said, I don't view it as a problem solved. There's been progress, but there's a ways to go yet. If I were still at Interscope, here are the things that I'd be worried about. Pay attention to this one, guys. I'd be worried that I don't have a direct relationship with my consumer. The artists and the streaming platforms do. Yeah. I'm going to repeat that one more time. I'd be worried that I don't have a direct relationship with my consumer, but my artists and the streaming platforms do. Now, that's the way the record business used to work. Corporate DNA matters, right? It's something that you can count on. Just the same way that, this sounds strange, but the DNA between sports rivalries, right? There's some matchups in basketball and college basketball and college football that are always, the dice are tumbling because of the history of those. The DNA is there.
How they say, throw out the records when these two get together. It's going to be a slobber knocker. It doesn't matter if one's up this year, one's down. When they get together, throw out the record books, and it's anyone's ball game.
Exactly. And so with corporate DNA, you have the record industry has never, ever known who you are as the end user, right? How many CDs, 8 tracks, cassette tapes, albums have you purchased in your life? And they don't know who you are. Because you've never been their customer. Their customer's always been the distributors. Their customer's been Best Buy, Walmart,
Tower.
Sam Goody Music, Tower Records, Music Land, mom and pop record stores who buy boxes of records and then sell them. That's who they get paid from. That's the definition of a customer. Okay? Compare that to Amazon. What does Amazon know about you?
Way too much.
Holy cow. Everything.
They know what size underwear I wear.
Yeah, they know how often you buy it.
Exactly. They know how I run through them, and they probably
know
why.
what you looked at buying but didn't buy. And they keep all that data, and all those algorithms are working to help them market products. So you see why I've been saying this forever. Like, the record industry has to move from where they are now, which is the way they've kind of always been operating, into operating more like Amazon, on top of being the good stewards of talent and developers of talent, et cetera, et cetera.
Because what it comes down to, the music labels are middlemen, right? Just like they're just another version of a middleman, just like Spotify or Amazon or whoever streaming service is.
Such a brilliant way to put that. Say that one more time.
The labels are just acting as another middleman, just like Spotify.
Yeah.
It's just another step. It's just more middle.
Think about that from the artist's perspective, right? Prior to all this, prior to the 2010s, you don't get an audience without a label.
Right.
Not an audience big enough, right?
Because they're the bank and their distribution.
Yeah. Yeah. And they have a relationship with radio. Listen, most people are aware of this who are in the music industry, but there might be some people who never thought about it from this perspective. Some artists that are out there, some musicians that are out there who never understood this. But in the heyday of the music industry, we had about 7 or 8-ish major labels, and each of those major labels had a pretty solid average of about 500 artists apiece, and 95% of the artists lost money. But it's not because they sucked. It's because they couldn't find an audience, but it wasn't because the audience wasn't interested in being found. It's that there's only 12 songs an hour on the radio.
Yeah.
And so there was a mathematical logjam there, and they couldn't get in front of enough eyeballs to grow the audience. So they lost, and the ones who got on the radio won. They made so much money, it covered all the losses from the end. But as an artist, Brent, let me ask you this. From an artist perspective, when you hear Jimmy Iovine say, I'd be worried that I don't have a direct relationship with my consumers, and the artists and the streaming platforms do, your point about them being the middleman is exactly right. Now they're becoming a cumbersome middleman in the commerce.
Yeah.
In the easy flow of commerce. Okay. Now he goes even better here. He goes, I'd be worried that artists like Drake or Billie Eilish streams more than the entire decade of the 1980s, according to the information I've seen from labels and streaming services. I'd also be worried that the streaming services aren't making enough money because that can jackknife. Well, that is going to jackknife. Okay. The relationship that Spotify has with all the labels now is unsustainable. So Spotify is such a big brand, it'll probably still be around, but it will be different. You know, Amazon can afford to not make money on streaming because it's a loss leader for them.
Yeah.
Right. And for that matter, so can Apple. Apple makes money selling electronic products, not streaming music. You know, are they trying to be profitable on that? Yeah, but there's a lot of wiggle room to go. So they might be able to afford the adaptations that are going to come, the unsustainability of the business, because to them, it's a branding thing and it's a loss leader.
Yeah, that's just what I was thinking. It was branding because they're Apple, their creativity, their art, their youth, you know, so it makes sense for them to be in the music, not just players, but streaming, that sort of stuff. It's brand congruent with how you think about Apple.
Yeah, Spotify's going to be absorbed by a label, or they're going to just end up dropping all of that and just be a podcast service. Because I'm telling you right now, whatever money Spotify's making, it's not enough, right? But if you own the rights to the content that's creating the traffic, because you own the traffic, because you're the record label, whatever you're paying Spotify is too much.
Yeah.
It's because you don't need to pay them.
Right.
Because you have the traffic. This is why all the networks started streaming their own stuff. At the time, nobody was going to Netflix for Netflix. They were going to Netflix to see Friends.
Now, one thing that is interesting, though, is in a way, Spotify is bringing traffic if you're hoping to get your artist discovered. Because, like, I'm on Amazon Music. So this morning, before I hopped in the shower, get that image out of your mind, I put it on a playlist. And I put it on, like, I don't know, like Rising Country or one of those that's like, oh, let me listen to some stuff I don't already know. Because I already know what I know. I want to hear what's not my jam. And, you know, hear something good, like, who is that? Oh, okay, interesting. And so in a way, like Amazon, which is a streaming service, is bringing some traffic to these artists that I might not have heard about otherwise. So I think there is a give and a take, and I think that's why the labels are playing ball with them, is because, like, well, they are bringing some ears that we may not get otherwise.
Yeah, but no, see, I disagree with that. And I'll tell you why. Because Spotify's not bringing the ears. It's the traffic from those other artists that you haven't heard about that's bringing the ears. And Spotify has the data, and they need the data, right? Like, what it costs to break an artist right now is astronomical, right? We're talking millions of dollars. But I've always been of the position, like at Daredevil, like, give me a budget for one P1 radio single. Give me a $500,000 budget, and we can do more damage and make an artist profitable with that amount of money so that they can afford a longer runway, right, to take off, which is intolerable. Long runways are intolerable if you're dropping $500,000 on one single, and maybe after two singles, you've dropped $1 million plus radio tour, and plus the cost of the record, and plus the cost of all the other promotion. And you're like, you know what? This isn't going to work. And so we got to cut bait, right? And the artist doesn't get a chance. But if you can make them profitable early, you can afford to make a Frank Zappa artist way, way, way bigger than he was, because you're not bound by the commerce of it, and you're not bound by,
you could be a lot more efficient in finding the people that are going to like that Frank Zappa art.
Yeah. And so, I mean, two things here. The point that he said about the artists have a relationship with the consumer, and so do the DSPs, and they don't. But imagine being able to pick out digitally who the early adopters are, who the pioneers are in the marketplace, right? Like, here's this group of people that always got to be first. This is the guy, this is the girl who are the first one on your block with that new artist you never heard of, because they spend a large amount of their time searching for new artists because they like to be that person. Okay. And the rest of the world, it's not going to show up on their radar screen until it becomes more popular. How important are those people?
They're the new DJs. They're the new Wolfman Jack.
Yeah.
You know, you had to get
That's
one
exactly
of those,
right.
We got to get one of these cool DJs on this song, or like Bobby Bones, right? So he helped break Chris Jansen and Chris Stapleton and maybe some other Chris's. But because Chris Jansen didn't have anything, I mean, he had a label deal. That went away. He's independent. He puts out this thing, They'll Buy Me a Boat. And Bobby Bones digs it and he spins it, and Bobby has a big audience, but he's like, I played it because it was cool, not because he was on label or not because he wasn't on label. I thought it was cool. I spun it. Next thing you know, Chris Jansen's freaking Chris Jansen. And he always was, right? But now he gets to be that on a bigger stage.
Now more people know about it.
Now he gets to be that on a bigger stage and in cooler rooms because Bobby Bones was a trendsetter, a curator, right?
Yeah.
And so these early adopters, they're the new DJs of digital jockeys, right?
They are.
They're digital jockeys.
So here's
Still
the thing.
DJ.
And they've always
Tastemaker.
been that, though, right? They've always been that. And here's the difference. I'm going to try to explain this because I don't know if I can do a good job of explaining it. But if you think about, we've said before, like Seth Godin, people like us buy products like that. When you extrapolate that into the music industry, it's people like us love artists like that. Okay. So the first 300,000 Nirvana records of Nevermind were purchased by people who were fanatical about Nirvana, who really freaking loved Nirvana. And the other 9.7 million were bought by people who want to identify with people who really like Nirvana. Okay. And it's those 300,000 people, if they don't come into the market first, the other 9.6 million aren't going to. Okay. But when you're doing broadcast platforms, when you're trying to break that band on radio, it's the same price for everybody. You're going to get that new person who's going to be a real hardcore fan, that super fan. And you're also paying to get in front of the vast majority of the audience who isn't going to give a crap until they come in, until those other people come in. They're not going to give a crap
until a certain number of people give a crap.
Exactly. So think about it this way. You brought up Luke Bryan before, right? Like Luke Bryan, 6 number ones. Lots of people love Luke Bryan. Millions of people. Country icon, superstar.
Yeah.
For one record, right. Never been done before. Thank you. Never been done before in the genre of country music. But the people who don't like Luke Bryan are equally as passionate. They think he's the devil. They think he ruined country music and ushered in bro country, and they can't stand Luke Bryan. And this doesn't matter to a major label. When they're paying $500,000 to promote a Luke Bryan single, they're spending a boatload of money to put that in front of people that they know don't like their artist. Now, it doesn't matter so much when you reach Luke Bryan status, but when you're trying to break an artist, if you can digitally identify those first 300,000 people that are going to be the ones in this genre that are going to make your artist profitable and move that needle before you even begin to blow up the rest of the market, and you can treat them like rock stars. I'm talking like limousines to shows at a club, you know, like we understand who you are. You're an influencer. It's important that you come in here because these are the people who really, really love brand new music. And then by the time you shift your marketing efforts to the other 9.7 million people, there's a party going on and they want to know why they haven't heard of it. This is a much more efficient way, a much less expensive way to break an artist instead of spraying and praying and hoping that it catches on.
Well, it's like the domino thing, right?
Yeah.
You can try to push over a domino as big as a door, and it takes a lot more effort than knocking over a small domino. But if that small domino is the lead domino, it can knock over a bigger domino, and that bigger domino can knock off a bigger one. Next thing you know, you're at the size of a door, and you just knocked over the small little domino. It has that kind of effect. They're the small domino that if you can find them, and if you can hire them, maybe you can hire the A-team. Sorry. If you can find them, then you push that lead domino over, and then you can get to the big mass market, the late adopters, a lot more easily.
Yeah, and the brand is ready to be introduced to the mass market. Or if it sucks,
you find that out earlier and cheaper.
Yeah, exactly.
Right,
exactly. If it's just not happening, we can cut bait and try another single.
Like you want to fail expensive or you want to fail cheap?
Exactly, right? So this is what I'm talking about. Like if you think back to the Amazon thing, like they know what you bought. They know what you looked at but didn't purchase. They followed you around with it. They know your credit card. They know your email address. They know your phone number. They have all your shipping addresses of your friends and family. Like the labels don't have that information. And when they do, and they will get it, it's going to make it a lot more efficient to get an artist in front of your face, right? Because, hey, we've got all this data. But as far as the Spotify thing is concerned, in country music, the discovery part of that is really, for all intents and purposes, non-existent. Now, I think maybe it happens a little bit in pop, but it's not really helping that much on the discovery thing. And I think there's some other reason. That's another episode. You probably get more
discovery on TikTok.
But
I mean, that's where Old Town Road blew up and this other stuff.
Because there's way more repetition, right?
Yeah. I'll be on there scrolling through every once in a while, and you'll hear the same song used for tons of videos. They just kind of go viral, and people pick what's popular because they're trying to get optimized. Oh, this is popular. Let me hop on this trend. Yeah. And you start getting those reps of just hearing this bit of this thing. You're like, who is that if it's good?
And on that note, if you put a gun to my head, I can probably rattle off 3 or 4 artists I know of that broke on TikTok. I still am not sure. I'm sure they're out there, but I don't know of one who broke on Spotify, So there's that, right? And that's extremely important to our audience right now, because this is what you're trying to do is break. You're trying to get that audience to be bigger.
Labels will look at your streaming numbers if they're legit, like, I want to spin your stuff. That is something they look at. But then they may pluck you from there and put the major money behind you. But I mean, that's why Old Town Road was such a big thing. Like, he blew up on TikTok, and Blanco Brown had stuff that blew up.
Yeah.
But who's the Spotify story or the Amazon Music story of that?
Yeah, they don't exist. I mean, at least not in any amount outside of like a lottery ticket winner or two. Right. And they certainly exist, but that is not the norm. But here we've got, YouTube. Boatloads of artists that have broken on YouTube, and boatloads of artists who make very comfortable 6- and 7-figure livings on YouTube, and TikTok, same thing going there, right? So it's going to fold in. The rights owners are going to absolutely be in charge of it and collecting all the money. It has to go that way. It's unsustainable without it going that way. Okay. So here's the last part of this that I want to share so we can wrap this up. So the next question is, what about the future of the record business? Why should the next Billie Eilish sign with a record company at all? Why should the next Billie Eilish sign with a record company at all? Here's his answer. The artist now has something they've never had before, which is a massive direct communication with their audience from their house, from their bed, from their car, whatever. And because of that, everybody wants them. Spotify wants them. Pepsi wants them. Coke wants them. Apple Music wants them. And people that make terrible second records are still famous and still have online audiences. The power of celebrity, this obsession with Instagram, it's driven by personality and lifestyle. So here it is. Guys, this is going to make your whole holiday season. So hail to the artists, because in the end, they're winning. It isn't their problem to figure out how the streaming company and the record company are going to make more money. It's the streaming company and the record company's problem to figure out how to become more valuable to that artist. Guys, I mean, that's from Jimmy Iovine. This is the new record industry. And you need to be playing the game, and you need to be moving your chess pieces on this board so that it looks like this, right? If you're still the artist that's looking for the record label to provide value to you, do you see how the recipe's already wrong? That's from the top, man. That's from the top, as high up as you can get, right? And he gets it. And believe me, everything will adapt and the labels will change. And that's what it'll be, more partnerships that are involved. There's going to be more money for artists and for writers, okay? Because they own the traffic. Okay, labels aren't going to be able to sign artists for big record deals that are really long anymore, because artists don't need that security, right? In fact, it's going to be against artists' better interest to do that. Like if we have a big brand name right now and I'm an artist that's making $1 million a year as my business, and then I sign with you because I want to make $10 million a year, and we go do that. Well, now I got a bigger brand name, but it's still my name they're looking for, not Universal. Not Sony, not Warner Music, not Broken Bow Record. They're looking for me. Okay. And so I own the traffic. And so what would labels do? Do you see how that's unsustainable, right?
What's scary is a cheap way for them to go in is like, oh, we'll do all the internet marketing and we'll find out who your fans are and we'll own that information. And then you're locked in because like, if I leave, they keep my email list. Like, who has ownership of that? You don't want to be an artist that the minute you leave the label, they're like, all right, we're keeping the list though of like everybody who's bought your records the last 4 years. You got to go find them again.
Yeah.
Well, crap. Why would you? I mean, because they'll figure that out. Crazy, they'll do that and they'll want to own it because that's leverage. That's value. The money's in the list.
The money is.
And
yes.
If you don't own that list, you don't own much. I mean, you have a great product, but again, how are you going to get to the people that love it and would love it and want more of it?
So this is the free market at work. And remember when we talked about like when Sony sold their Spotify shares and they said they're going to offer a little bit of money to their artists. And that was like a mind blow because it was a benevolent move, never done before by a record label, because that was the crack starting to show. Like in 2018, they started to realize, okay, we're going to need to do more to keep them on board because they don't necessarily need us to get to radio anymore. Like they can get to that audience directly. And then the bigger story was 2 weeks after that when Beggar's Table, which was a significant indie label, came in and said, hey, we made $130 million selling our shares of stock and we gave 47% of it to our artists and very little of it was for recoup. So artists on that label got a big, fat, stinky check just for being part of the home game. Do you see what's happening, people? Do you see how the playing field is leveling out? And do you see that, if we go back to my last episode of Moneyball for the music business, your problem isn't that you're not on radio. Your problem isn't that you don't have a major label deal. Your problem isn't that you don't have a booking agent. Your problem is you don't have traffic and you need to create the traffic. And when you start creating the traffic, the whole music industry is going to be your bitch. You're welcome. I don't need you. You need me. How are you going to add value to me? Instead of having your hat in your hand going, I wish someone would sign me. This is what we have been talking about for 4.5 years. And I was just so excited to read that article, Brent. I mean, I was like, there it is. I see the same thing he sees. And so now I know I'm not crazy. Yeah. I know it, Now aside from that, and just about everything I think you and I have predicted has happened. Yeah. So anyway, guys, well, listen, download the free PDF informational packet. Okay. This is for you. No cost. It's 21 biggest reasons you don't have more fans and how to fix it. This is going to help you get your head straight, untie the knot of what you've been chasing as far as what you think is going to help you get ahead and focus on the stuff that is actually going to help you get ahead in the new music business. Go to giftfromjohnny.com, JOHNNY, giftfromjohnny.com and tell us where to send it. We are available for consultations. Send an email to info@daredevilproduction.com. Production, there's no S, so it's just singular, info@daredevilproduction.com. Put consultation, the subject line, and we can help you connect some of the dots with your specific situation. Here's the assets. Here's what you need to work on. Here's what you need to spend your money on. Everybody's got a budget, I understand, but make sure that you're spending it in the right thing, in the right place, and that you're moving the needle forward. Okay. We're here to help, guys. This podcast exists because we want you to win. So keep on climbing.
And we'll see you at the top. And that was not one of your shorter episodes.
I know.
And the American Songwriter Podcast Network is going to slap that explicit label on our podcast no matter what. Johnny's going to use it.
Yeah, that's right. I'm taking a little bit of leeway there.